So Dr. Delisle has taught gifted children and those who work on their behalf for more than 38 years. He retired from Kent State University in 2008 after 25 years of service there as a professor of special education. He's authored more than 250 articles and 19 books. His work has been translated into multiple languages and has been featured in professional journals and popular media. His newest book is Dumbing Down America, the War on Our Nation's Brightest Young Minds, and what we can do to fight back. So please welcome this evening Dr. Jim Delisle.
Well, good evening, folks. It is evening, right? It is good, right? It's all those things. All right. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I feel like I'm a regular now at Fairview High School. I was here, I think, on the same stage several years ago, and it's a great place. My son is a CU attendee. He didn't graduate, but did come here when he was in college. So we have fond memories, my family and I, of this wonderful valley and the people in it. And I want to thank Tracy and the whole BVGT board, or whoever made this happen tonight, as well as the kids here in the audience who I know from various places and parts around town and around the world. So thanks all of you for coming. I've worked with, as Tracy said, gifted kids, teenagers especially, for way too many years, 38 years. That's a long time. And I've learned a few things along the way from them. Our son also was identified as a gifted kid when he was young, although he called himself junior varsity gifted. And here's why. There was a gifted program in our public school in Ohio that catered to the top 3% of the student body, and he didn't qualify for that. And then they had an enrichment program just kind of below that, and he got into that. So he called that the junior varsity gifted program. So he was gifted on Tuesdays, and he kind of liked that, you know. So we've raised a gifted kid. I've worked with him for 38 years, and I actually met my wife because of our dual connection in the field of working with gifted kids. So hopefully what I have to say tonight will have a base of reality to you. And I bring it to you. This presentation is one that I did just a couple times, and the first time was last year at the school at which I work in South Carolina. I commute between Washington, D.C., and I found out last night the only city in the country that doesn't plow their streets as well as Washington is Denver. Although we got 26 inches and they only had 12. Anyway, where was I going with that? Anyone know where I was going with that? What about it? Oh, what is it? The last gave the presentation. Thank you. Yeah. I still teach, even though I'm retired, I still teach ninth graders 2 days a month, which is as much as anyone should have to take ninth graders, but I teach them 2 days a month. And it's a school in South Carolina that's very cool. It's a public school system in Horry County, which is the Myrtle Beach area, and the county itself geographically is larger than the state of Rhode Island. So very diverse in terms of economics, in terms of race, everything. And so there's a school there, a high school, that the kids come directly from middle school and they go to college directly from middle school. We have 180-person high school on a college campus. So the kids do take high school classes, but starting second semester of ninth grade, meaning now, the kids start taking college classes, and they get dual credit. So by the time they leave, they have more than 70 up to 100 credits of college under their belt, as well as getting a high school diploma. It's an awesome school at which to work, and it's a high-pressure school. Maybe you understand that if you're the smartest kid in 8th grade, and then you go to a high school where every other kid was the smartest kid in 8th grade, that's a new reality. And for some kids, it's a very tough reality. In fact, I ask the kids the first day I meet with them, it's only one day a week, one day a month, and I see them more as a guidance person rather than a teacher person. And I have them fill out this form, and one of the questions is, one of the items is, I think I'm the dumbest of the smart kids here. And they could either check that or not. And about 70% of the kids check, I think I'm the dumbest of the smart kids here. And so I have to give them a dose of reality, which is 70% of you cannot be the dumbest kid. It just doesn't happen that way. So I try to give them a sense of balance, which I think too few of our kids have. these days. And so that's really what the presentation is about tonight. It's directed to you as parents, and it's directed to the teens who are here. And hopefully you'll see yourself in some of the images, if you will, that I display. Now I have to do two things at once. I have a clicker and I have my computer. I have to do them simultaneously. This should be fun. So let's see what happens. I'm going to give you a quiz to start with. Okay? And you don't have to do anything writing down, but what I want you to do is add a series of numbers as I show them to you, just out loud. Okay? So that's 1,000, obviously. If the next number is 80, what will you say? Nice and loud, 1,080. And just keep adding and we'll see where you get. Okay? So say the number. Keep going. I heard 5,000 and 6,000. They're both wrong. The answer is 4,100. And I was so sure you were going to say that. I made up a sign. How many of you said 5,000? How many of you still think it's 5,000? That's not. 4,090. You did great until you got there. 4,090 and 10 is not 5,000. But all the other things added up to neat hundreds, so this one should too, right? Wrong. Something that's very obvious sometimes is wrong. When I taught middle school gifted kids, which I did for 17 years, I gave them this quiz every first day that I met the 7th graders, and they'd mostly all get it wrong real fast because they're smart kids, okay? And I'd say, all right, there are 32 of you in this classroom. You all go to the same school. You live in the same town, Twinsburg, Ohio. You all have a lot in common in that sense. You're all identified as gifted. We'll talk about what that means. But that means there's a lot about you that's similar, where you're from, how old you are. But every one of you has something unique that if I don't look closely enough, I won't find it. But if I do look closely enough, that'll be what separates you from everyone else. As collective as we are, we're also unique. So my job as your teacher this year is to find what makes you a 4,100. And I find that same thing is true with virtually every gifted kid I've met, that there is no such thing, for example, as a homogeneous class of gifted kids. I've never had one. Because within that class, there's so many unique personalities, so many unique needs, so many unique wants and hopes that we have to look at these kids not as a conglomerate, as society often does, but as the individual kids that they are. So that's the journey I want to take you on. If you want to make an easy $10, bet somebody they'll get this wrong, and you will get it. Trust me, you'll make an easy $10. Okay. This is the first item I'll start with. Oops, now I have to go here too. Your teen may be intellectually gifted, but other areas of development might not be quite as advanced. Name one area of development of your kid who brought you here tonight that may not be as advanced as their intellectual development. Organization, yeah, okay. What else? Social skills. Emotional skills, social and emotional skills. Time management, why do you need that? I have no time for that. What else? Responsibility. How about common sense? Ooh, an app attached my intelligence as he's falling over the cliff. But I think a lot of times, maybe you don't, but a lot of society in general, educators can be guilty of this. They see that you got a smart kid, and so they assume a lot of things that may or may not be true about responsibility, about turning in things on time, about all of these other things. But just because you're smart doesn't guarantee that's a piece of it. And I see this in young kids, but I see it more and more in teenagers, and they're the ones who get blamed for, if you're so smart, why can't you? And then you fill in the blank. Sometimes they can't do it because they're not there yet, or sometimes it's not important to them. But we can't assume that kids are always at this high level. Intellectually, they might be, but in other ways, they may not. Socially, they may still be 10 years old. One of the young men I teach, Barrage, skipped 2 grades. So he is starting college as a 9th grader, but he's really a 7th grader in age and size. And socially, he's not much different than most 7th graders. But here he is supposed to sit in a freshman class in Spanish, a freshman college class in Spanish. So you have to take these things into consideration. If your kid sometimes acts like a kid, be thankful. Be grateful. You don't want them acting as little adults all the time. Sometimes you do. But if that's who they are all the time, that's not who they are all the time, if that makes sense. So I asked my freshmen, and a lot of the stuff I'll share with you tonight comes from one of two places. Either what I call the Delisle file, which is stuff that I've published that I'll share with you, or from the freshmen I teach. These are now 2 years old, these quotes. But these are the kids who want you to know from their own point of view what's important to them. So let's see what the first one is. Oh, I'm sorry, first let me do this one. The woman who probably did more than anyone else in this field about understanding the disparity in gifted kids' development is a woman named Lita Hollingworth. And look when she wrote this, back in 1942. And I love some of her quotes because she wasn't using politically correct language back then, to be honest. And she said, "Children of very superior intelligence are not as a group socially annoying." Now, as individuals, they might be, but as a group, they're not necessarily socially annoying. And I love this next one. Many a reformer has died at the hands of the mob he was trying to reform. Does your kid try to fix everyone's opinion? Try to fix everything that they think is wrong? That's okay, but do it in safe company. Because when you try to fix everything about people who don't get you or know you, sometimes socially it can lead to awkward places. But that doesn't mean the ideas are wrong, it just means they need to know their audience pretty well. Oh, this one. It's hard for them to maintain silence when ideas press for utterance. Same idea is right above that. Sometimes it's okay to have a thought and not say it out loud. Say it to me when the company leaves. You know, there's all kinds of clues you can give them that they may not pick up on because they just feel they have to make the world right, even with their language. And this one, to have the intelligence of an adult and the emotions of a child combined in a childish body is to encounter certain difficulties. Isn't that an understatement? Isn't that an understatement? It's almost like you want your kids to wear something on their forehead that says, "At this minute, I am acting this old." Because they might be 12, and you may be having a conversation about who's going to be the next president and why, which is a very mature conversation, unlike the candidates themselves. And then they may socially want to play in the mud, you know, and all within 10 minutes. And that's kind of who gifted kids are. I mean, the fancy term is asynchronous development. You know, kids who develop like this in different areas rather than like this. And all kids to some degree do it, but gifted kids and kids at the other extreme, kids with severe disabilities, have those same connections, if you will. So if you have a kid who's very intelligent and sometimes acts stupidly, that's part of the package. You know, in a sense, cherish that, even though if it happens too much, you don't want to. But really, that's something that's just a part of who they are. The next comment, is expect your gifted child to want more freedom and independence than you are prepared to give them. And here's what one of my freshmen said about this. Actually, there's a Facebook cartoon first. How do I block my parents from Facebook? So from a very young age, they want this independence and they want this freedom. But here's one of my freshmen who said this. "I have a system, and I would appreciate if you would acknowledge that. They may have work habits that you don't. They may study with music blaring and headphones on, or both. They may do things that don't seem right to you, but does it work for them? If it does, acknowledge that, let it be. It's their way of getting things done, not necessarily yours. And when I'm taking a break, don't harp on me to do more. If all else fails, remember when you were 15. When you were 15, you wanted some downtime." I learned this lesson well, and I know a few kids in the audience here are from a camp I work at in Michigan each summer called Camp UNASA. Yay, UNASA, right? Woo! And this is 70 highly gifted kids who come together for a week, and we have a blast. But the one thing we thought as counselors, and it's people like Patty Gatto-Walden, if you know her, a therapist with gifted kids from Denver, and Michael Piachowski, who's one of the heroes of our field, 82 years old and going strong, and all these other really cool people who know a lot about gifted kids. And all we did was overschedule them, when what they need to do is just sit and play a game or do nothing at all but rest. Once in a while, that's okay. More than once in a while, that's okay. And sometimes we think if the kids are always so able to be on, that they don't need that time to just chill, to just exhale, whatever you want to call it. And we found from our experience that's exactly what many of these kids need. So going along with this, from my Delisle file, it's not uncommon for gifted teens to be in the company of older people. So when your 16-year-old balks at a 10 p.m. weekend curfew, or your 15-year-old reminds you that I'm taking college classes so I don't appreciate being treated like a kid, take a few deep breaths before you respond. Did any of your kids, even as little kids, prefer to be around people older than they were? Yes? Why? Because you get it, you take them seriously. And with age mates who are not necessarily of the same intelligence level, a lot of these kids don't know where else to go. If they're the only gifted kid in a class, or they have to find 50 kids to find one who understands the stuff they're talking about, naturally they're going to gravitate towards people who get them, older teens, adults, whatever. And so they expect that independence because they seem to feel that they've earned it, whether or not they have. So use your teen's past performance as a gauge for future freedom. Start slowly with one or two concessions and remind your teen that freedom is not given, it is earned. For example, our son, when he was growing up, never had a curfew because, you know what? He never needed one. He never once, until one year, in senior year, he never once abused the privilege of being able just to say, Mom and Dad, I'm staying out until this time, is that okay? Or asking us. We never said, you have to be home at a certain time, because sometimes, even as a teenager, you want to do something a little different from what that time would say. But that was our son. That was our kid. It may not be yours. Find what it is, what those freedoms are that you can give them liberally, but with constraint, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, not just give it out because they're smart kids. Sometimes it's harder to rein it back in. Give it out gradually. The next one is another reason why these kids oftentimes prefer the company of older people. And it goes along with this third point, that the reason your gifted teen has older friends or wants them. This is a quote I've used a long time, and it's written by an adult remembering when he was 7 and finding something out about him that just made him literally shake. And he said this: when I was in 2nd grade, the teacher gave a homework assignment introducing the concept of zero. There were several problems in which zero was added to or subtracted from various numbers. Of course, the answer was that the number always remained the same. I sat alone in my room and stared with tears at the seemingly senseless problem. I wondered, how could I add something to a number, and yet the number remained unchanged? Suddenly, I understood and had the first mystical experience of my life. The immensity of the concept of nothingness overwhelmed me. I was awed by the realization that mathematicians were brilliant enough to capture this immensity in a little symbol. I felt a sense of comfort and light. Most 7-year-olds would go home and say, easy homework. This kid understands the concept of zero at the age of 7. Zero didn't always exist as a concept, and when this kid discovered it, it changed his life. So, of course, if you're having conversations about the concept of zero with other 2nd graders, they may not get it. So, of course, you're going to be around other people. You want to be around other people who can feed that. Water seeks its own level, and so does intellect. And we have to appreciate that. Of course, there are some concerns if your young kid is hanging out with kids way older. Of course, there'll be concerns about that. But overall, it's more common than not with gifted youngsters. One of my good buddies here in the Denver area was actually profiled in Rolling Stone magazine a few years back. His name is Santiago Gonzalez. I'm not sure if anyone knows Santi, but he just finished at the Colorado School of Mines with his master's degree at the age of 16. He started there at the age of 11. Remarkable young man. And his parents were most concerned. I'll never forget this. They said, what do we do about this? Because he finally got a cadre, when he was about 14, got a cadre of students. They used to study together and stuff, and they realized after this kid was so young, and like, what's this dude doing here? After he was acing their tests and he wasn't, all of a sudden he was a little more accepted. Anyway, so they were going to have a party at one of the people's apartments, one of the students' apartments. And the parents, of course, are very leery. These are college students. They're going to do stuff that 14-year-old Santi should not do. These kids did something that was so cool. The college students, they put together a party. There was nothing more than popcorn, soda, PG movies, and board games. They made it a safe place for him to be 14 among a series of 18, 19, 22-year-olds. And again, I don't want that every day, but I give the parents a lot of credit. I give these students a lot of credit for realizing that this kid's needs, he had a peer group now, even though it wasn't his age. And to him, that was vital, and they were able to make that happen for him. Okay? Do any of your kids ever say, I'm bored in school, or I'm bored in life? All those things. I don't like when kids say that because I tell them that if they're bored, they're probably pretty boring to be around, which is true. If your kid is bored in any situation, sports, school, anything, if they don't take it upon themselves as a teenager to try to make changes, then the problem is not necessarily with me, the teacher. It might be a dual thing with me and that student. So what I want these kids to do is something I call promote self-advocacy. And if you take a look at this, and this is a wonderful website to look at, it just came up about a year and a half ago from a good buddy of mine from Wisconsin who worked with gifted middle school kids for about 20 years. And she got tired of hearing these kids say, I hate school, it sucks, all this stuff. And she said, what are you doing about it to change? Nothing. Because the kids didn't feel they had any power or authority, or they went about it like a battering ram and no teacher's going to listen to that. What this website offers, and what Deb offers through this website, and the many, many kids who have put information on it, is if something is not clicking for you, if you're over the age of 12, you've got the responsibility to try to make a change yourself. I can tell you that no 15-year-old wants mom or dad running into school trying to fix things. It's embarrassing. Unless absolutely all else fails. But if the kids haven't tried it themselves, they need to. And I love this definition of self-advocacy. Isn't that great? The process of recognizing and meeting the needs specific to your learning ability without compromising the dignity of yourself or others. What a powerful statement. You're not asking for something outlandish, you're just asking for something that fits. And one of the pieces on this website, and I know this is awful to read, that's why it's on the website so you can download it, is something I and a colleague put together more than 20 years ago called 10 Tips for Talking to Teachers. If you go in with just a half-baked idea of, I hate school and I don't know what I want to do different, but it's not this, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you go in with a plan, and this is a 10-step plan that's basically built on tact. First of all, you make an appointment to talk. You don't just stop a teacher in the hall. They're busy, they're going to the bathroom, they're trying to do something. But you can say, I have a question I'd like to ask you about, or a concern. Is there a good time that we could meet? 98% of the teachers will say yes. Okay, and then you go, if you know other students who maybe have the same concern, can you go in together? Not as a gang, but go in with a common concern, because maybe having one meeting instead of 4 might work out better. Think through what you want to say before you get there. You don't stammer through your words. You rehearse it, either with your teacher, with a parent, with a friend. And number 4, choose your words carefully. Instead of saying, I hate doing reports, they're boring and a waste of time, that's not going to get you very far. Could you see, is there some other way I could satisfy this requirement? You give an option rather than just saying, this doesn't work for me. I know a lot of adults who could use this in terms of tactful situations. But kids need to know that it's not disrespectful to ask an adult for something because what they're getting doesn't fit. They just need to ask it in a way that I as an adult or you as an adult are willing to listen. And I don't think we've taught our kids that. We've not taught them that well at all. One of my heroes is a man who died in the 1980s named George Roper. And he started a school for gifted kids that's still in operation. He started it in 1941 in Michigan. And where's Jeff Morrow? He used to be the director of the lower school at Roper. And this is just one man whose work is absolutely stunning. If I read some of his stuff from 1956, you'd think I read it from something he wrote yesterday. We have just written an article called Prescient and Often Not Accounted For, Prescient, because this man's thinking was so far advanced. But this is what he said. As his mission, he put this on his curriculum vitae in 1968. Nothing is more worthy of research, understanding, and improvement than the means to encourage children to achieve full development as creative intellectual beings for the satisfaction of their own and mankind's aspirations. Isn't that what we want? The kids to help themselves and hopefully in the process to help us as well as a planet, as a species, whatever. And yet they can do that if they take the reins instead of having somebody always give the reins to them. And that self-advocacy piece, especially for highly gifted kids who may not be having a good fit between the curriculum and the school they're in, is really giving them a sense of power in a good way. And then when they get to college or they go someplace else where if you don't fight for you, nobody else is going to, or argue for yourself, this will give them the tools to do that. So use that website. It's powerful. There's many testimonials from middle and high school kids about what they did. Sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes it did. Life is like that. But just give that a try. It really is a great site to use. Someone mentioned this earlier. Time management and organizational skills can't be taught until they are needed. Uh, if any of you have kids who seem totally disorganized, if it works for them, that's fine. But for a lot of kids, it worked for them in elementary school, and then they get to middle or high school and it just doesn't work anymore. If this is a case, the best person who can teach your kid how to help, and I think I actually refer to this in the next slide. Let's see. Yeah. Many gifted teens have never had to study or manage their time in elementary or high school. Is that elementary and middle? Is that true? They breezed through, they didn't have to open a book, and they still aced their tests. Okay. But when they hit high school, oftentimes anyway, that all changes. When your gifted teen finally reaches the point of frustration and seeks help, or should, the best person to teach these skills is often another teen who has already mastered them. We as adults try to go in and have them color-coded folders and all these kind of little techniques and tricks. They might work, but the best person to teach this is not somebody who's 30 years older. It's somebody who's 2 years older who said, I remember doing that when I started school. This is what you do instead. That's what I see at my high school, because there's only 180 kids in the whole school. They eat lunch together because they have to. They all did at the same time. You seldom in a high school this size, especially I would think, see a lot of freshmen talking to high school seniors. At our school you do. And after the initial awkwardness, especially from the freshmen, comes off, you see these kids being, in a sense, very informal mentors. Not just about academics, but about social stuff, about all kinds of things. But time management and study skills, and when you've never studied before, how do you know what to do? And a lot of kids don't. They're stymied by that. The best person to show them and tell them and help them with that is actually somebody else, just a couple years older, who can give them the skills that they've already possessed. Okay? Next one. Allow natural consequences, because the greater the force, the stronger the resistance, which you've probably learned time and time again. Excuse me while I get to the next slide here. And this is what a freshman said about this. Realize that when we get not the best grades, that we still tried our hardest, and it's not the end of the world. We realize how important our grades are, and we want to keep them up. We don't need the added stress and guilt about them. Or this one, just accept the fact that we aren't perfect, even though we are probably trying very hard to be. No one wakes up in the morning, no student I know, wakes up and says, oh, I wonder what I'm going to fail today, or what I'm hoping to fail today. But if they're taking something that for the first time is really challenging them, and this will happen, whether it's 5th grade, graduate school, somewhere along the line, that first time is going to be a total shock to the system, isn't it? Remember that first bad grade your kid got? That bad grade might have been a 94, depending on your kid's perspective. That bad grade might have been a 38. Who knows what it was? Because I like one kid who used to say, to him a B plus was a failure, and the kid next said, well, a D minus is still passing. So we've got different levels of what's acceptable here, and you can't really tell with grades, and oftentimes grades aren't even true indicators of what a kid has learned. As I've asked virtually every student I've ever taught, do you ever get an A in a class where you learn nothing? And every gifted kid's hand goes up, okay, because they know that sometimes those A's aren't earned, they're just given. So when they finally hit that brick wall, and eventually it will happen, take a breath, because they may be as disappointed as you, but they may even be embarrassed about it. Again, I'll never forget, it was 2 years ago, this one girl in my class was in tears. Just not like little tears, big time things. And I went up to her and I said, obviously something's not good. And she said, look at this. And she showed me her paper. It was an English class, and it was a 98. And she said, this is the lowest grade I ever got. And I couldn't say to her, oh, get over it, it's a 98, because to her, 98 was painful. And we have to remember that. If our kids are feeling pain about a grade, even a 98, that's their reality. And we have to take that as legitimate and hopefully get beyond that. But at the time they're feeling that's not good enough, we can't take it away and say, yes, it is. Sometimes we try to, and it just doesn't work for that. Let them take a breath, just as you take a breath, and see this from the bigger perspective. I'm going to get into this a little bit more with a song by 21 Pilots, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes. Next piece is from my Delisle file. Punishments and contracts seldom work with gifted teens, but honest discussions about the importance of balance in one's life is a great place to begin planting seeds of personal responsibility. A weekly time with your teen, one-on-one for 20 minutes, may help you connect in ways that both of you and they thought you had outgrown. Our teens are busier than they need to be. We all know that. sometimes doing the right things and sometimes not. Can you spend 20 minutes, that's it, even now in the car, but hopefully someplace else, just with no agenda at all, and you make that time sacred. You do not lose that time. That sends a message, especially if you have multiple kids. It's hard to just juggle them all. 20 minutes a week with one kid to just check in is something that can be so valued for both you and them, and especially as teens, as they're kind of finding more independence and you're trying to hold on a little bit sometimes to what they are feeling. This 20 minutes, excuse me, can be just a lifesaver for both of you. Natural consequences, what does that say? It kind of got eaten away there. Natural consequences, they're remembered far more long after the relief of a parent rescue has subsided. We are good rescuers with our kids. Sometimes we need not to be. They don't study. If you don't study, you're going to get a D. They get a D. That's the natural consequence of not studying or not doing the work or not turning it in on time. I'm not saying we shouldn't teach our kids responsibility, but when they choose not to take it, that's not our flaw as parents. That's the decision they chose to make as a young adolescent. Okay? And this one, I think you'll agree. A teen's greatest enemy is the lack of sleep. Oh, let me go back to that previous one about punishments and contracts. If any of you have kids who could perform at very high levels academically and they choose not to, a lot of folks call them underachievers. I don't. First of all, that's an incredibly disrespectful term, because when you hear the term underachiever, what other words do you think of? Lazy, slacker. Is there anything positive when you say underachiever that comes to mind? No. So, and I have heard this more times than I can count, a parent who with the kid there will say, this is my son, he's a classic underachiever. So what does the kid think? Lazy, slacker, all of these things. It's a very, very disrespectful term. The term I use is selective consumer. Because every kid I've ever met, and my background is working with kids with emotional disorders and special ed needs, every one of those kids had something they were good at and loved. It just may have had nothing to do with school. And we don't honor that. We seldom honor that anyway. So if you have a selective consumer, it's a kid who really excels at certain things and not others. The punishments, the contracts won't work, because what happens is we say, okay, until you bring your grade point up to, whatever standard you like, no more driving privileges, no more computer access, no more sport. We take away the things that they love most under the assumption that they'll hate it enough that they'll work for us. That's a dynamic I'm really uncomfortable with, because oftentimes if they're not performing, it's for reasons that are very legitimate, like it's irrelevant to them. I've done this 400 times before, why do I have to keep doing it? There's all kinds of reasons we need to ask about. And the comment I always hear from realists is, oh yeah, but when they get into the job market, they're going to have to do stuff that's boring and just you have to suck it up. But guess what? If you had a job like that was so bad, banal, boring, dull, you would quit, or you would try to and move on. When you're in 9th grade, you can't quit. You can't just walk out. So you do it the only way you can, which is to stop performing, to do stuff that if you as an adult had to do it, you wouldn't either. So this is the time to have a dialogue. It's a chance to have that 20-minute conversation about what matters and what doesn't, because too often times we punish and contract our kids to death, and it really in the long run doesn't help. I haven't seen it help. Maybe I'm just naive, but I have not seen contracts work with incredibly smart kids who know what they need to do to make things right in terms of grades, but they refuse to do it because it's not allowing them the dignity that if this teacher knows I know all this stuff, why do I have to keep showing it? That's a question of dignity, not performance. Okay, and that's a different dynamic than I think a lot of people have. So anyway, getting to the thing about lack of sleep. Crankiness, listfulness, and generally unattractive attitudes are a direct result of lack of sleep. Find methods of relaxation, yoga, deep breathing, daily exercise, quiet music, reading a boring book to help your gifted teen get the 8 hours of sleep a night that is sadly lacking in most of them, sadly lacking in most of us, isn't it? And if you are a constantly sleep-deprived parent, this sends a message to your teen, the wrong message. I mentioned that I work at Camp UNASA every summer. And the first year I was there, this would be my 4th, the first year I was there, they told me that the first 90 minutes after breakfast was doing something called psychosynthesis, right? I'm like, what the heck is that? And basically it's guided imagery. And we did it for we were to do it for 90 minutes with a group of 10 kids each. I'm thinking, what are you, crazy? 90 minutes of relaxation, 90 minutes of guided imagery. These kids are not going to stand this. These are smart kids. They're always on the go. Does psychosynthesis work, you guys who have done it? It's the highlight of most of the kids. They just love doing this because they have a chance finally to reflect, to calm themselves down, and to basically just relax a little bit in a world that doesn't often allow that. I end my 50-minute period in South Carolina with the kids. I try, it doesn't always work, to have the last 10 minutes to be a mini psychosynthesis thing for 10 minutes. And if I don't do it, there's at least more than a handful of kids who say, I miss that we didn't do that today. So this time to kind of exhale, if you will, is as vital for them as it is for us. Whether it's through exercise, yoga, whatever floats your boat, as we used to say, that's what to find, because these kids are oftentimes so on. And I love this about needing time to relax and all this. And here's Charlie Brown, just taking ready to go to sleep, and he says, sometimes I lie awake at night and ask, what is the meaning of life? Ugh. And then a voice comes to me and says, I before E except after C. As smart as these kids are, they're still little kids. As active as their minds are, they still need rest. And we cannot downplay, as I think we have too often, the importance of that. The next one kind of goes along with this previous one, which is, too fast again. Walk away from incivility. Moodiness doesn't have a logical base. And things are not working with your kid, you're just head-to-head. The worst time to talk about that is when you're going head-to-head, all right? And sometimes you'll have a teacher-parent meeting where it's, you must be Timmy's dad, I'm Timmy's teacher. Sometimes just like, what is going on with this kid? Anyway, from the freshmen, they said this, I may not always be in the best mood a lot of the time. I hope you can realize we're not trying to act like brats, just that we do get stressed out. Well, this one, stress comes naturally with a program like ours. If your kids are in an IB program or something that's very highly intense, wonderful programs, but there's sometimes a lot of stress there. If your child is moody, snappy, or otherwise unpleasant, don't think too much about it. This comes from a freshman. Or this one, we want you to know that we love you even though we get angry and we get overwhelmed. Again, the power of just listening to these kids talk about their own moodiness, their own crankiness, and where it comes from. So this is one, I'm sure some of you have heard this song, and I want to show you some of the lyrics to it, as well as play the song. It's so, I share this with my own students, and if you haven't heard the song, you need to hear it.
I wish I found some better sounds no one's ever heard. I wish I had a better voice that sang some better words. I wish I found some chords in an order that is new. I wish I didn't have to rhyme every time I sang. I was told when I get older all my fears would shrink, but now I'm insecure and I care what people think. My name's blurry face and I care what you think. My name's blurry face and I care what you think. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. We're stressed out. Sometimes a certain smell will take me back to when I was young. How come I'm never able to identify where it's coming from? I'd make a candle out of it if I ever found it. Try to sell it, never sell out of it. I'd probably only sell one. Maybe to my brother, cause we have the same nose, same clothes, homegrown, a stone's throw from a creek we used to roam. But it would remind us of when nothing really mattered. Out of student loans and treehouse homes, we all would take the ladder. My name's blurry face and I care what you think. My name's blurry face and I care what you think. Wish we could turn, give each other different names. We would build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream of outer space, but now they're laughing at the face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah. We used to play pretend, give each other different names. We would build a rocket ship and then we'd fly it far away. Used to dream of outer space, but now they're laughing at the face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out.
Used to play pretend bunny. We used to play pretend, wake up, you need the money. Used to play pretend bunny. We used to play pretend, wake up, you need the money. Used to play pretend, give each other different names. We would build a rocket ship and then we fly far away. Used to dream of outer space, but now they're laughing at the face, saying, wake up, you need to make money. Yeah.
I love that song. I love the message. Yeah, we all want to go back sometimes to the good old days, don't we? When the mama sang to sleep and now we're stressed out. Something came out just recently about this, and thanks to my friend here, Terry Bradley, who introduced me to this. And I don't know if, Terry, you want to say anything about that article, that the blog, but let me introduce it first, and then if you want to say something about it. But let me just, prior to that, and get to what happens after that song. Don't fight your gifted teen when nothing worthwhile is being accomplished. Say something like, I don't believe we're accomplishing much right now. We'll discuss this at another time, and then do it later. The worst time to talk about some argument is when you're arguing. Let it go, and then come back to it if you need to. You have a fresh set of eyes and see the problem from a different perspective. And when your teen's mood is especially foul, it happens to all of them, ask them to halt. If you've not tried this strategy, it works a lot, doesn't always work. Ask them if they are hungry, H, angry, A, lonely, L, or tired, T, and ask if they tend to these needs first. Things oftentimes get better. The hardest one to me is lonely, but all the others, if they have these things going on, take care of these basic needs first, if you will, and then the bigger things might get a little smaller. All right, but that HALT strategy to me is a very powerful one to use. But this is the one that I'll share and then ask. Do you mind saying something about it, Terry? Okay. This is, again, when you work in a school, I'm not saying I know the school or this district. I think I know it enough. But the school I work at, where kids are just wondering, is it worth... I mean, I've had one kid just last week say, I study more than I sleep. Is it worth it? I don't know the answer to that, because it's an individual answer. But this girl, a 10th grade girl, wrote something on a blog about maybe 3 weeks ago, or actually January 7th is when she wrote it. And it's very powerful, so look it up on the site and certainly share it, read it yourself and share it with your teen. But she as part of it, she... Darren, you wake up, we got to make... There we go, all right. This is just 2 excerpts from about a 5-page blog, for which she was getting extra credit to write, by the way, which I think is ironic. But she says here, I know that I didn't come out of the room screaming, how many points? I'm even nearly positive that in kindergarten, when I was exercising my developing reading skills, I didn't say, sure, I'll learn to read, but only if it's for points. So when did this happen? Okay. And then she goes on after a couple pages. She said, students are in a sort of tug of war on a daily basis. Our enthusiastic and good-intentioned teachers are pulling us in one direction of true education, while the ominous college offices are pulling us in the opposite direction. As far as I know, the people judging our transcripts will always win. And I don't know if we've had this conversation enough with our kids, and maybe with our faculty, if we're high school, middle school, especially high school faculties, though, about the cost of the pressure that these kids feel. Yeah, the world is going to be pressure-filled, but do you need this at 16? Wake up, you got to make money. Do they need that ethos, if you will, in their mind when they're still developing those minds? And this girl's blog is very, very powerful, and I think worth a discussion. I'm planning to share it with some of my, not probably every one of my students, but with some of my students, because what it has to offer is just a really dose of reality from a 10th grade girl struggling with, if I want to love learning for the sake of learning, are they going to understand that when I apply to college? And again, that answer is a very tough one, because in some cases the answer is no. So it's really a matter of priorities and setting the tone, I think, in your own home. The next is going into that your gifted teen needs more alone time than you think they do, especially if they're very active, very involved, and then all of a sudden they come home and they just need to decompress, if you will. And I love this visual that kind of expresses that really well. And it could be the less stuff on the left could be what takes place at school, and the stuff on the right is what is at home, or vice versa. But if your kid is, your teachers say, well, your daughter is very quiet, and you think, is this the same kid? It may be because in one place they're one person, if you will, the talkative one, and one place they come home and they're very quiet. Or it could be just the reverse. They're quiet in school and they come home and they're just like, one way or the other. But oftentimes they just do need that quiet time to just settle into their own mind and think about sometimes nothing and think about absolutely everything. And this is privileged time. And I don't think, all you need is a hammock in the bedroom, something like that, so you can swing life away and just have a little bit of time to just enjoy doing absolutely nothing. Dumbledore had a great quote about this, one of my favorites from him. He said, I sometimes find, and I am sure you know the feeling, that I simply have too many thoughts and memories crammed into my mind. At these times I use the pensive. One simply siphons the excess thoughts from one's mind, pours them into the basin, and examines them at one's leisure. Wouldn't that be the best? You take all of these thoughts, put them to the side. I'll take it out when I have time. We don't have that perhaps now except in the Hogwarts world, but at the same time, your kids do need that and oftentimes are crying to have that. Next one is about intensities, if you will, and why they sometimes need some time alone, and I love this cartoon. The good news, says the principal to the parents, is your son is advanced. The bad news is that we're afraid he's going through a midlife crisis. And so many times, very bright, gifted kids and teenagers have ideas that are bigger than they are. Even when your kids were young, if anyone ever said your son or daughter is an old soul in a young body, does that sound familiar? They think about things, worry about things, perseverate about things that you wish you could just erase because they're so young and in a sense so fragile, yet they still can't get these thoughts out of their mind because they're just in their mind. I like to introduce kids to themselves through this chart and other work that I've done in this area on intensities. And when I share this with kids, I'll say this isn't a contest to see if you have all of them. It isn't a race or anything. It's not a prerequisite to being a gifted person, but a lot of gifted people are not just smart, they're also deep. So let's take a look and see if that fits you. And then I share with these examples, the intensity of thought, the kid whose mind is always worrying, they're so excited when they come home, they literally are shaking as they're telling you something they learned. When they're little kids, they usually do that. But they go to bed and they can't sleep. All they do is think about this, all these things going on. They just cannot, they find it tough to shut off their mind. And intensity of thought, are always asking questions, always, but not just to get your attention, because they really need information, again, especially when they're younger. Intensity of purpose, once they decide to focus on something, it's hyper-focus. I don't care if it's the latest video game or just how to perfect a sport or a musical instrument or whatever it is. They have this hyper-focus until they learn something to the satisfaction, and then they usually oftentimes move on to something else. The intensity of emotion. It's like kids have highs up here and lows down there and nothing in the middle. You want to just say, chill out, you take things so seriously, but that's how they're wired. That's who they are. And instead of downplaying it as much as to say, it sounds like you're really upset about this, instead of saying, trying to take it away and say, don't feel so bad, which is a stupid thing to say basically, it sounds like you're really struggling with this, just to see how they react. Instead of questioning or telling them what to think, probe more into what they're thinking. or feeling actually. Intensity of spirit, always looking for someone else to help. They bring home the stray cats, dogs, and in my son's case, girlfriends. They always bring home and just say, where did this one come from? And I was like, what's going on here? But it's basically they just have a soul and a heart that's bigger than they are. They see what's going on in the world, and with the internet, they see it the same time we do. And they wonder why it has to be this way. It could be a small thing, it could be a huge thing. If your kids get upset, they see something about the Zika crisis, they see whatever it is, and they want to fix it. And as teens, they have more ability to at least put this in proper perspective. The younger the kids are, the less they're able to do that. As intellectually able as they are, emotionally they may still be 7 years old. And then the last one, the intensity of soul. She asks questions that philosophers have asked for centuries and still gets upset when we can't give her definitive answers. And the example I've used for years is from my own son when he was 4. I know we're talking about teenagers, but he's 36 now, so he doesn't mind me telling him kid stories about him. But when he was 4, he had this ritual of when we tucked him into bed at night, he would say, I have 3 questions, or 2 questions, whatever it was. And this particular night, he only had 2 questions that he wanted to ask. We're like, yes, we'll finally see Seinfeld from start to finish, And the first question was, if we'd allow him to paint his bedroom lime green, because lime is, well, he said lime green, but he wanted to be the color of the Hulk, because he loved the Hulk. We had a 100-year-old house. It was like not a good interior color. So we said no to that. Okay. Second question was, do you feel the same way right before you were born and right after you die? Lime green, good color. Ask your mama. I don't know. And he's 36 and I still don't know. But instead of trying to fake it, just tell him it's a great question. You wish he had an answer. I was just talking to the new director of the National Association for Gifted Children, great guy, and he has 4 young children. And he was saying his 6-year-old, I guess, all of them are pistols, but the 6-year-old especially, and his favorite bedtime stories are the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas. Like, what? I actually went online and found a book on St. Thomas Aquinas for kids. I sent it to him. So now he's happily has a bedtime story that the father can understand as well as the 6-year-old kid. But not many 6-year-olds are going to want to have that kind of book read to them. But if they do, that intensity of soul is right there. And it's very powerful stuff. If you introduce your kids to the fact that sometimes these can get messy, sometimes people don't fully understand them, but they're just a part of who you are. They're not liabilities to be gotten rid of. They're assets to be cherished and kind of channeled. That goes a long way towards having them see that, again, giftedness is not just smart, it's also deep. And this, I think, is one great way to do that. Next one, understand that less than perfection is more than acceptable. And as a teen said, just because it's not an A does not mean I didn't try. We seldom ask, did you try, or how did you try? And sometimes you don't want to try hard anyway because you didn't like the thing. Is that okay? You have to decide that as a family as well. I'm not always going to, in quotes, do better next time. It's another platitude we give out. Oh, you'll do better next time. Maybe they won't. And that really doesn't, you don't know. And kids know that, teenagers know that, so don't say it. It's just not something that they're going to buy because it sounds like something a parent is supposed to say. But then there's this cartoon, which I love, where this kid is asking Mom if he can have dessert, and he says, Mom, can I have this last piece of cake? So, everything is relative, isn't it? And I use the story, and if you've heard this before, I apologize, but I tell it all the time. When I was growing up, I was raised in a city called Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is the poorest city in New England. It was 2 years in a row rated as the worst place to live in America. Yes. It's called a decaying urban slum, and it is. It's home. I didn't know, when you're growing up and stuff like that. So my brother and I went to high school. My parents never graduated from high school. My mom eventually did, but my dad never did. He had a 9th grade education. And then I went on to get a doctorate when I was in my 20s, which is pretty young. And I just wanted to get it done before I had a family and all these other responsibilities. So I was just glad it was over. But my parents wanted to give me this big celebration party, which of course they said potty, because that's Boston, And so they gave me this party, and all the relatives came over, including Aunt Peggy. And I bet you know her. Because Aunt Peggy, if you're the balloon, Aunt Peggy is the pin. Okay? So Aunt Peggy, anytime there's free food or stuff, she'll come over. And so she's sitting there and she's telling me what a great job I had done and how proud she is of me and how I saved the family name and I didn't get arrested too often, all these wonderful things. And she's drinking her cheap Carlo Rossi wine and she's squeezing my cheek like I'm 7. And she said, Jimmy, we're so proud of you, but you could have been a real doctor. Do you know her? No matter what you do, it's not good enough. Because I didn't become a medical doctor, which is what gifted young men like me should have become, according to Aunt Peggy. I wasn't on my radar screen. I wanted to be a teacher since I was 6, and I never regretted, well, there were certain days, but they were never, overall, never did I think I made the wrong decision. But because Aunt Peggy saw something in me that she said, then you have to become X, Y, or Z to be considered, in her eyes, a success, I didn't buy into that. Luckily, I had parents who said, whatever you want to do, it's your life, go for it. But how many of our gifted kids have that? I met a young girl in Pennsylvania last 6 months ago or so, and I was doing a workshop similar to this for teenagers. And she was sitting down, and she was dressed all in black, heavy, heavy eye makeup, black makeup, kind of gothish looking, very gothish looking. And we just got in a conversation about stuff you want to do in life. And she said that she wanted to be a makeup artist for, like, in Face Off, you know, that TV show, and she wanted to be like Walking Dead makeup people. You know, she wanted to do that kind of stuff. And so kids were just going around saying what they wanted to do. And at the end, or during a break, I went up to her and I said, so why do you want to do that? And she looked at me kind of suspiciously and she says, what do you mean? I said, well, it sounds like a very interesting career. What about it interests you? And again, she said, seriously? And I said, yeah. She said, no adult has ever asked me that. All they've ever said is, that's stupid. You'll never make money doing that. No one ever asked her, what is it about that that fascinates you? Our son's major was creative writing. What did virtually every adult, other than my wife and myself, say to our son? You're never going to make money doing that. When you're 12 years old, I don't care what you want to become. At one time, he wanted to become a toilet paper maker. He just didn't know how they got all that paper on the roll. But whatever they decide to become, when you're 12, you're not thinking of anything more than, this is what I love. This is what fascinates me. And when some adult, Aunt Peggy, with a pin, comes along and says, you're too smart for that, what does that say to you? That you're not worthwhile unless you're doing X, Y, or Z. Our son's doing okay. He got that degree in creative writing. And now he's a special effects editor, writing on the side, and just won an Emmy last year. So he's doing okay. But Aunt Peggy would probably still think he's not good enough because he quite didn't become what he might have become. So many of our kids run into that, the highly gifted ones, thinking that almost everything is a disappointment to somebody. So I try to give them a dose of reality by sharing stuff like this. Oops, I went too ahead. That people who are really good at what they do, and it's football time here in Denver, the greatest quarterbacks complete about 60% of their passes, and they still get paid gazillions of dollars. Or basketball players, they make about half of their shots. Major League Baseball players, if they get on a quarter of the time, they're average players. If they get on a third of the time, they're superior. A 300 average is superior, and if they get a 400 batting average, we call them Ted Williams. But I don't think, and that's only a couple seasons, I don't think we see a lot of folks with a 400 batting average as failures, do you? I don't think so. Yet they mess up a lot more than they get hits. Mess up from the perspective of not doing what they were supposed to do when they went up to bat. But our kids don't often see this. They only see the accolades. They don't see the other stuff that goes into this, the wholeness of it, and we can help them with that. It's the same thing with writers. I keep pointing it in the wrong place here. That John Grisham's first novel, look at all the rejections he had for that. He actually had this movie, his A Time to Kill book. When it finally came out, they only made 5,000 copies, which is not a lot of copies for a book publication. He bought 4,000 of them himself and sold them out of his old blue Volvo because he didn't want to find them in a half-price bookstore. I don't think he's worrying about that too much anymore. But look at all the others on here. J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone as it was called in England, was rejected by more than 25 publishers. She doesn't even know how many because she kept throwing the letters away. And I have to correct this last one because Jack Canfield's Chicken Soup for the Soul was not rejected by 36 publishers. It was more than 100. There's more than 100 publishers, and now you can buy chicken soup for your chia pet. You can buy chicken soup for everything, But somebody just didn't think that was good enough. The movie The Help and the book that preceded that, more than 60 rejections. I've written 22 books. That's a lot. 19 have been published. 3 have been rejected 56 times. My first book's been rejected 37 times. I'm still a writer. I'm still an author. That's what I want your kids to know. If they love something, they're good at it, it won't always end up exactly how they intended. That's the way things go. Every author, every athlete, every person in business knows this. So keep your kids' perfectionism in mind when you say this, and be careful not to say any of these things, okay? It keeps going ahead of me here. Up, way ahead of me. Your report card is good, but this is the Aunt Peggy statement, because no matter what you say, after you put the word but in it, it's like a kick in the butt, because anything you said that was a positive prior to that goes away. What you say instead is your report card is good, and. Just substitute the word but for and what you do is you continue the positive. Now, if you have to say something negative, I'm cool with that. Just don't say it at the same time you're trying to give a compliment. If you're at work and you get evaluated, you know the sandwich theory. You get all the good stuff up front, then they pile the bad stuff in the middle, and then they leave you with a compliment. And now you go out thinking, I think I just got dissed, because you know that the stuff they really wanted you to do was the bad stuff in the middle. They really wanted to focus on that. We get an evaluation with 100 items on it, 90 of them are good. We focus on the 10 that aren't. That's human nature to do that. But we can change a little bit of that by changing that single word but to and then going later and say, all right, can we talk about some other stuff that you need to talk about, but you didn't want to do it simultaneously. This will be easy for a smart kid like you. First time in a gifted program, first time in an AP class, anything like that. Well, what if it isn't? You say that kind of in an encouraging way. That's often not how it's interpreted. What you say instead is, I'm really proud that you're ready to take this challenge. I've got your back. You say something like that because it may not be easy. And if it's not, and they have to come to you and almost like, I hope they're not so disappointed in me, this leads you to a disappointing outcome if it doesn't work out quite the way you hoped it would. I don't care about your grades, I just want you to do your best. That's a crock. What I want you to say instead is, I don't care about your grades, I just want you to try. Because that's what we mean. But when you put the word your best after it to a kid who is very grade sensitive, they think that means everything has to be perfect or an A. Even though you may not intend it that way, that's oftentimes how it's interpreted by the kids. So just again, cut it short. I don't care about your grades, I just want you to try. That's what we mean. So let's just say that. And the last one, you're not working up to your potential. This is a stab me in the heart. I hate this statement. Is anyone here tonight want to just say, excuse me, I'd like to make an announcement? Sure. I've reached my potential. Time to die. It's just a stupid statement. And how many times have we said this to our kid? Your teacher says you're not working up to your potential. And yet we give them no parameters as to what that means. We give them no guidance, no guidelines, nothing. So they're left with this void of are you going to tell me when I get there? It's almost like we know, but we're not telling you. The word potential is a loaded word. And again, for kids who are very sensitive towards their own progress, their own grade satisfaction, the word potential can be debilitating. So really try to get rid of that one at all. If you said these things, join the club. I think everyone in this room has said at least one of these things. We can make changes. But again, we sometimes don't recognize something that makes sense to us, like potential, may not have a whole lot of meaning for the kids with the kids in our care. And I just love this cartoon because sometimes you have to wonder, does the apple fall far from the tree? How comes you got a D's in English? Which I just kind of like because I'm kind of bizarre. Anyway, okay, I'm going to be ending real soon here. So let's see how many of these I got. Okay. And this is one thing from I call her my gifted grandmother. I showed you George Roper earlier, and this is his wife, Anna Marie, who's one of my heroes in gifted education. She worked with gifted kids for 70 years, 70 years. This lady knows her stuff. And she said the greatest gift that we can give to our gifted children is a belief that the gifted child is average with gifts, not superior with faults. And when you hear that, the average with gifts means they could be the smartest kid in the school, but if they sit alone at lunch because nobody wants to sit next to them, that still hurts. It's still lonely. If you get picked last in elementary for the kickball team, I don't care how smart you are, that still hurts. That's average with gifts. The superior with faults is the kid who comes home with an almost perfect report card, and you say, you're not going to get into Harvard without B+. instead of recognizing all the stuff that they did do. Okay, so if Anna Marie said that after working with 70 years for kids, I'm going to believe her. And this one, I kind of alluded to this already. It's okay for gifted teens not to know what they want to be when they grow up. A lot of your kids have what we've come to call multi-potential. And multi-potential is you're so good at and interested in so many things that how do you just pick one? It's like going to a smorgasbord in Vegas, going to the Bellagio smorgasbord in Vegas. Oh my God, there's got to be 500 items there. And imagine if this was the scenario. You walk into that buffet and the maitre d' says, oh, welcome to the Bellagio, sit where you want and stuff like this. And we have 500 items on our buffet. Feel free to enjoy any one of them. You're like, dude, it's a buffet. Yeah, the rule is as much as you want of any one item. That's the rule. That's what a lot of gifted kids feel when they're told to pick a college major. Because I love the arts, I love science, I love this, I love that. How do I pick? How do I pick when everything sounds good? And especially if they go to a school, you're more privileged here to have a university town, but in a smaller rural area where kids may have not had a whole lot of high school classes that were advanced, or at least even a large variety, and then they come to a place like CU or anywhere, where at my university there were 528 academic majors. If you say you want to major in biology, the first question is, what kind? And virtually any subject you pick, the answer to the question is, what kind? And a lot of kids don't know that, and it confuses them even more. When our son was at CU, he was only here for 1 year, he had 5 majors in 1 year. He started with creative writing, then he took a philosophy course, and he loved the professor, so he switched like 3 weeks in. He wanted to be a philosophy teacher, then he wanted to be a psychologist, then somehow pre-med got in there, I don't know why, and then all of a sudden now he went back to creative writing. I think your kids will choose a career based on one of these 3 things. Love of the subject, that's when they're 4 and they want to be toilet paper makers because it just seems so cool. The obligation to pick something gifted, sorry Jim, you can't be a teacher, you're too smart for that, which is another thing Aunt Peggy said. Or prestige and money. Prestige and money will get you so far, but what if you hate what you do? What if you come back every day from work and go, oh, I'm making a lot of money and I hate going in? Is that life? You know, help your kids decide to become what they want and to try something out. And I wish, in the greatest scheme of things, for 90% of the kids who were sent off to college, I wish they were required to have a major in I don't know. Because do you, at 17, really know? Some do, a very few, but others are just saying what they know because other people have thought that sounds really cool, that sounds really gifted, that sounds really smart. They may not know, but I know so many kids who are pressured to pick a major for a variety of reasons, but they really don't know. And they feel guilty because they don't. I don't want them to feel guilty because they don't know. I don't want them to know at 17 what they want to do at 40. I think that's a pretty okay thing. Thomas Friedman, one of my favorite authors, kind of agrees with me when he said this. Whatever you plan to do, it's a great, you can find, this was a commencement address he gave at Williams College. He said, whatever you plan to do, whether you plan to travel the world next year, go to graduate school, join the workforce, or take some time off to think, don't just listen to your head, listen to your heart. It's the best career counselor there is. Do what you really love to do. And if you don't quite know what it is yet, well, keep searching. Because if you find it, you'll bring that something extra to your work that will help ensure that you will not be automated or outsourced. It'll help you become an untouchable radiologist, an untouchable engineer, or an untouchable teacher. Wise advice for the kid who's going to grow up to be something he or she wants to be instead of something that somebody thinks they should be because they're so smart. And the last piece is continue to be a parent. As much as they may appear that they don't want that, the majority do. And here's what the freshman said about that. Assure me that you'll support me through everything and that your love is unconditional, not based on grades. It's probably as stressful to be you as it is to be me. How wise a statement is that? And lastly, even if my results aren't as good as they were in middle school, I'm trying to make you guys proud. So I'll end with this 2 letters, or 2 things. One is a letter written by a kid I knew who was a high school valedictorian. And this is the address that he gave to his classmates. And then I'll end with a quick poem written by an 11-year-old. But here's what John wrote, and again, gave to his commencement address. He said, like countless people have asked countless other graduates, a man asked me, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? But as I stood there dumbfounded, eyebrows bent, mind perplexed, I realized I had no idea. And I realized, too, that it was good not to know. It was good not to have any idea. It was good not to know where my money will be invested in 10 years, or where I will be working in 5. It was good not to know for whom I wanted to work, or where, or why. It was good not to know how big my house will be, or what kind of car I'll drive. It was good not to know about retirement, or IRAs, or 401k plans. As I stood there with that curious man who was asking a question I couldn't answer, I realized that not knowing was good, because if you aren't careful, you can grow up too fast and die too early, thinking only of security, planning jobs and things. It's too easy to lose what matters. This is what you can lose: the beautiful innocence of youth, the wild fun of running in the rain, going to amusement parks to eat cotton candy and ride rides, staying up late on purpose, going to ball games, fishing all day in dirty rivers, the purity of dancing and singing loud off-key notes behind the comfort of a closed door. What else you lose? Turning with friends to the wisdom of classic rock and roll to learn about life and women. Hanging out, doing nothing. Making believe, walking barefoot in the woods, climbing trees with ball caps, sweatpants, and dirty t-shirts, skipping rocks and spitting, sitting, building sandcastles, asking questions about weird, crazy people and things. When you plan too much, you lose important things like watching cartoons and not caring that Wile E. Coyote comes back after every ill-timed attempt with boulders. Laughing at least 37 times every day. Loving everything and everybody because the world seems like one of those books that you save for a rainy day in a soft, high-backed chair by the window. It was good not to know what I wanted to do, because when you're young and fresh and innocent, you can't go wrong. Someone once said, when you're young, you're golden. So wherever I go and whatever I do, with the rest of my life, I'll always stay young and I'll always stay golden. Thank you. And then to end, let's see what this is here. This is a poem written by a 11-year-old. My wife was a teacher for many years, and she had this incredibly gifted young guy named Robert who was in her pull-out gifted class in elementary school. And the teachers and decided, okay, this kid doesn't need the basic 5th grade stuff. He's doing stuff way in advance of that. So they allowed him to buy time, take the pretest, and then whatever else, this extra time he had, he could do whatever he liked within reason. And one of the things he wanted to do was write a book of poems about science. And so he wrote 21, I think, beautiful poems at the age of 11 that meshed together the beauty of poetry and the wonder of science. And this is one that he wrote for what he said was generic parents. He didn't want his parents to take it personally. But I'd like to end tonight, even though he was 11, not quite an adolescent in some ways, nonetheless a great message that I think I want to leave you with Robert. He called it Kids and Kites, and he writes this: kites fly, but they need an anchor. Kids roam, but they need a home. If a kite loses its anchor, it falls. If a child loses his home, he declines. As a kite goes higher and higher, you give it more string. As a child grows older and older, you give him more freedom. But here the similarity ends. For kites, even with the most string imaginable, crash sooner or later. But kids, if they are old enough, adjust safely and create new homes. Not bad for 11. Not bad for 40, actually. But thank you for coming out tonight. I totally appreciate it. To my UNASA kids out here, so good to see you. We'll see you in the summer, maybe, again. And again, thank you, and I hope you can take some of this and use it and share it with the kids who brought you here tonight. So again, thanks very much, and thanks to BVGT for this.
Thank you again so much for coming out in the cold, and thank you so much, Dr. Delisle. Wonderful words of wisdom, or juicy bits, as we like to say. Really, really appreciate your time, and thank you all. Have a good night. Drive safe.
wish I found some better sounds no one's ever heard. I wish I had a better voice that sang some better words. I wish I found some chords in an order that is new. I wish I didn't have to rhyme every time I sang. I was told when I get older all my fears would shrink, but now I'm insecure and I care what people think.
My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think. My name's Blurry Face and I care what you think.
Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish we could turn back time to the good old days when the mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. We're stressed out. Sometimes a certain smell will take me back to when I was young. How come I'm never able to identify where it's coming from? I'd make a candle out of it if I ever found it. Try to sell it, never sell out of it. I'd probably only sell one. Maybe to my brother, cause we have the same nose, same clothes, homegrown, a stone's throw from a creek we used to roam. But it would remind us of when nothing really mattered. Out of student loans and treehouse homes, we all would take the ladder.
My name's Blurry Face and I